I'm a paranormal investigator, and the mansion that hired me is trying to keep me inside. Part 1. Chapter 1, The Letter. Call me Dylan. That's enough for now. This one happened not too long ago. And I still don't sleep the same. It started with a letter. Not an email. Not a phone call. A real letter on thick, antique paper with handwriting so elegant, it looked like it belonged in a museum exhibit, not a mailbox in 2023. I still remember the smell of it. Dust. Ink. And something faintly metallic, like blood rubbed into the paper by mistake. I touched it and something in me recoiled before I even opened it. My instincts are usually sharp, but this time, I ignored them. The envelope was addressed simply to Dylan. Paranormal Inquiry. Inside was a single page. Mr. Dylan. My name is Ellis Wintermere. You do not know me, and I suspect you've never heard of my family, though I imagine your kind often finds the dead more familiar than the living. I have recently inherited the Wintermere estate in Northumberland after the passing of my uncle, Everett. Since taking possession of the property, I have experienced occurrences I cannot explain. I'm not prone to fantasy, and I do not scare easily. But I believe something is wrong inside this house. I believe it's remembering something. Or someone. I am reaching out to request your presence. Not your opinion, your presence. I will cover all expenses. Please come. Before something else does. E. Wintermere. I folded the letter and sat there in silence for almost 10 minutes. That line stuck with me. I believe the house is remembering something. That was new. Most people say haunted. Cursed. Infected. But remembering? It was subtle. And that's what made it more unnerving. I did some digging. Wintermere Hall wasn't in any of the databases I use for haunted sites, cold case tie-ins, or folklore. Which was rare. It was as if the place had been deliberately erased or perhaps quietly forgotten. A single search on an old registry revealed a single black and white photo, a sprawling stone mansion, draped in ivy, with 4 tall chimneys and window shutters like eyelids half closed. Gothic architecture with subtle Baroque detailing. Built sometime in the late 1800s. No other details. No records of sales. No public images after 1952. But here's the thing. That one photo? I swear the window on the second floor was open in the version I saved to my drive. But when I refreshed the screen, it was closed. I chalked it up to tired eyes. Maybe a glitch. Maybe I wanted to believe that. Still, I packed a bag, made a few calls to my usual contacts. No one had heard of the Wintermeres. No criminal record. No known relatives besides the uncle who recently died. I booked a train. Northumberland was far enough out that even Google Maps stopped tracking halfway through the woods. Just trees, mist, and a flicker of asphalt like a dying vein. I didn't know it then, but by the time I got to the gates of Wintermere Hall, something had already decided I wasn't going to leave. Chapter 2, First Impressions. There's a silence some houses carry. The kind that isn't quiet, it's listening. I arrived just before sundown. The sky over Northumberland was bruised purple, clouds drifting like torn lace across the hills. My driver, a man in his 60s with too many rings on his fingers and too few words to spare, refused to take the gravel road all the way up. "This is as far as I go," he said, eyes fixed forward. I asked why. He said nothing, just pointed toward the tree line and pressed the gas pedal the moment I stepped out. Gravel crunched under my boots. And then I was alone. Wintermere Hall sat behind a wrought iron gate, half swallowed by thorny ivy. The family crest above the archway had been weathered smooth by time, but I could still make out a carved emblem, a single open eye, surrounded by roots. Beneath it, Latin script. Meminite Aedes. The house remembers. Cute. Someone in the Wintermere line had a flair for the dramatic. As I pushed through the gate, a cold wind crawled up my spine. The long path to the mansion was lined with warped hedges and overgrown statues, some of them eroded into faceless shapes. One held a book that looked disturbingly like it was made of teeth. I blinked. It was gone. The mansion itself was massive. 4 stories tall. Twin wings on either side, both stretching wider than they had any right to. The central structure had towering stone pillars, grimy windows, and black shutters nailed in place like eyelids hammered shut. Moss clung to the stone like it was trying to pull the building back into the earth. I stood there longer than I should have, staring up at it. I've walked into dozens of haunted places. Churches turned sour. Asylums that echo with too many footsteps. Houses that hold grief like wet insulation. But this place? It didn't feel haunted. It felt hungry. The door creaked open before I even knocked. And there stood Ellis Wintermere. Late 30s. Neat suit, though clearly not ironed in days. His hair was combed, but wrong as if styled by someone who didn't know how humans are supposed to look. He smiled, but the corners of his eyes didn't match the expression. "You must be Dylan," he said, voice clipped and formal. "Thank you for coming. Truly. You have no idea how long this house has waited." I stepped inside, and it felt like I'd crossed a membrane. The temperature dropped instantly. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, the kind that feels like you're being measured. The foyer was massive, with a grand staircase splitting in 2 directions. A chandelier above us hung dead and cobwebbed. Not a single bulb. Candle sconces on the walls gave off a weak orange glow, already half consumed. I heard a tick behind me. I turned. There was a grandfather clock beside the door. But no hands. Ellis led me through the entry hall, past faded oil paintings of unsmiling ancestors. Their eyes were all the same, glassy, wide, and subtly wrong. Each portrait bore the Wintermere seal in one corner. One of them, I swear, blinked. "The house has been difficult," Ellis said as we moved deeper inside. "Things are rearranging. Rooms that don't match the blueprints. Items going missing. I wake up with bruises I can't explain. And at night, I hear voices. Or something worse." He stopped before a narrow hallway leading to the west wing. "I don't go down this way anymore," he said flatly. "That's where it started." Before I could ask what it was, he turned and motioned toward the east. "Your room is this way. Don't worry. It's one of the safe ones. For now." He showed me a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Spartan. Bed. Wardrobe. Small desk. Everything smelled faintly of mildew and wax. The wallpaper was peeling, and one corner of the ceiling sagged like it had been soaked repeatedly. "You'll want to use candles. The wiring in this place is unreliable," Ellis said, setting a box of matches on the nightstand. And then he paused at the door before leaving. "Oh. One more thing." His voice dropped slightly. "If you hear knocking between midnight and 3, don't answer it. No matter where it comes from." Then he was gone. And I was alone in Wintermere Hall. The wind outside picked up. Somewhere, a door slammed, though I hadn't heard anyone else in the house. I unpacked my bag, placed a recorder on the desk, and lit 3 candles. As the wax spooled and flickered, I took out the letter again. I believe it's remembering something. Looking back, I think he was wrong. The house wasn't remembering. It was waiting. Chapter 3, The House Rules. A haunted house doesn't need to hide its secrets. It just needs you to agree to stay long enough to hear them. I didn't sleep that first night. Not really. I lay on top of the sheets, boots still on, one hand resting on the recorder, the other holding the letter. The candles burned too low and cast shadows that felt deliberate, like silhouettes caught mid-motion. A single knock sounded just after 2 a.m., 3 soft raps against the wall behind the headboard. I didn't answer. When I opened the wardrobe the next morning, it was empty. But the inside of the door was scratched. Deep grooves, as if something had been clawing from the inside. No dust. Just the marks, clean and fresh. I went looking for Ellis. I found him in what passed for a kitchen, a wide, cold chamber with stone floors and rusted cookware hanging from ceiling hooks. He was standing at the far end of a long wooden table, staring into a pot of boiling water. Nothing was in it. "Morning," I said. He didn't look up. Just stirred the water. "I hope you slept better than I did your first night," he said finally. "The house doesn't like new guests. Not until it decides what you are." I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. "Ellis," I said, carefully, "if you want me to help, I need to know what I'm dealing with. You've written to me like a client, but you're acting like a prisoner." He stopped stirring. His eyes looked darker today. Bruised. "You're right. It's time." We sat in a small breakfast room, sunlight barely leaking through the tall, narrow windows. It was hard to tell what time it was inside Wintermere Hall. The light always seemed a few hours behind the world outside. Ellis laid out the rules. 1. Don't explore after midnight. He said the rooms shift after the house goes quiet. Staircases appear where walls used to be. Doors open into blackness. Sometimes, you'll walk through a hall and come out in the wrong year. He once found a kitchen full of bread still warm, molded with a Wintermere family crest, but when he looked away, the bread was crumbling and full of worms. "Midnight is when it thinks you belong to it," he said. "Don't indulge the illusion." 2. Do not open the locked cellar door. It was sealed for a reason. Not by me. By my uncle. And by the staff before him. And the priests before them. Ellis didn't elaborate on what was down there. Only that it moves, even without air or light. That sometimes, the wood of the door pulses like it's breathing. I asked if he had the key. He looked at me and said, "The key is the last thing you ever want." 3. Never look into an uncovered mirror inside this house. According to Ellis, mirrors here don't reflect reality. They show intentions. Not your own but the house's. "I saw my mother in one," he said, voice low. "But she died when I was a child. In the mirror, she was holding a knife, smiling. I reached out. My hand didn't come back." He rolled up his sleeve. On his forearm were thin, crescent scars, mirror image scratches like something had tried to pull him through the glass. He poured tea with shaking hands, and I noticed his left thumb kept tapping on the edge of the table in a rhythm. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. "Those are the house rules," he said. "But there's one more thing," I replied, leaning in. "You said in the letter that you believe the house is remembering something. What did you mean?" He stared out the window for a long time before answering. "This place is old. But not empty. It remembers everyone who's ever lived here. Every lie. Every betrayal. Every scream." Then he turned to me, and his voice was the calmest I'd heard it yet. "And now that you've stepped inside, Dylan, it remembers you, too." After breakfast, I explored cautiously. Always with a candle. Always watching my reflection in the antique glass panes, never directly, only sideways. In the hallway outside the library, a mirror caught the corner of my eye. It showed me standing still. But my reflection was smiling. Later that night, just before sleep took me, I wrote the house rules in my notebook. Not because I might forget, but because I had the growing suspicion. The house might try to convince me they weren't real. Chapter 4, The First Night. Fear doesn't come all at once. It arrives in layers, scratching at the edges of sleep, peeling back your certainty like old wallpaper. The candles were nearly gone when I finally lay down. I triple-checked the lock on the door. Draped my coat over the only mirror in the room. I left my recorder running on the desk, red light blinking like a heartbeat. Wintermere Hall creaked and moaned like a sinking ship. But it wasn't the usual kind of old building noise. These sounds were too deliberate, like footsteps with intent. Long pauses between floorboard groans. Waits. Then another step. I shut my eyes. Tried to breathe evenly. I'd handled worse. Or so I thought. Sometime past 1 a.m., the scratching began. Not in the walls. Not at the door. Above me. A slow, steady scrape of nails on wood, as if something was crawling across the ceiling beams directly overhead. I opened my eyes and stared upward, watching the shadows dance across the plaster. The scratching circled once. Then twice. And then a thud. Not loud. Just enough weight to sound human-sized. As if something had dropped and landed on the floor above my head. Only, there shouldn't be anything above my room. Ellis told me this wing was capped by a steep, triangular roof. No attic. No crawl space. I'd seen the blueprints. And yet there it was again. Another thud. And another. Pacing, slow and deliberate. I reached over and clicked the recorder. Then, silence. No footsteps. No wind. But in the far corner of the room, I heard a creak, like a slow hinge, even though there were no doors there. Just wall. I didn't sleep. I sat up in bed until the candle guttered out, and the room went cold. At some point, I must have passed out. I woke to the weak gray of early morning seeping through the curtains. The kind of light that made everything feel unreal, like the room hadn't fully returned to reality yet. It was the smell that hit me first. Wet earth? Rotting leaves? Something like stagnant pond water. Then I noticed the sound. Squish. Squish. As I moved my boot, the floor beneath it squelched. I threw back the covers. My entire floor was dotted with muddy footprints, large, adult-sized, bare feet. They weren't just leading to or from the door. They were circling my bed. Once. Then again. Then a third time, perfectly spaced, like someone had ritualistically walked around me while I slept. And the mud, it wasn't fresh. It was dark. Thick. And full of twigs, clumps of wet moss, and what looked disturbingly like shredded linen, soaked through with brownish red smears. Blood? Earth? Both. I checked the soles of my boots. Bone dry. Still tucked neatly beside the wardrobe. And the recorder? Still blinking. Still recording. I rewound it, hit play. The static was loud at first. Then came the scratching. Then, faint breathing. It wasn't mine. It was too fast. Too shallow. And then, just past the 2-hour mark, came the knock. 3 slow knocks. But not at the door. From the wall behind my bed. Followed by a sound I'll never forget. A voice, just barely a whisper, right next to the microphone so close it made the static crackle. Is he asleep yet? I dropped the recorder. Then I saw the final footprint. One I hadn't noticed yet. Not in the mud. But in the dust on top of the desk. A single bare print smaller than the others. Child-sized. Left there as if something had stepped out of the wall, stood at the foot of my bed, and watched. And when I opened the wardrobe again, same as yesterday, there were fresh scratches on the inside of the door. Only this time, they spelled something. Barely legible. But I read it. Let me down. That was the first night. The night Wintermere Hall told me I wasn't alone and never would be again. Chapter 5, The Whisper in the Walls. You don't really hear the house at first. Not clearly. It comes as a suggestion. A tickle just beneath the sound you think you heard. I didn't leave my room right away. The muddy footprints were still there, dried now, flaking at the edges like old blood. I tried to brush a few with a towel, nothing came off. They'd soaked into the grain of the wood, like the floorboards had absorbed them. The message in the wardrobe "let me down" was gone. I had taken a photo the night before, just in case. But when I opened the image on my phone, the scratches weren't there. Just the inside of an empty wardrobe. By mid-morning, the silence had deepened. That was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't just quiet, it was hollow. As if the air had been drained of sound. Even my boots on the floor felt muffled, like I was walking inside someone's memory. I made my way toward the east corridor, hoping to find Ellis. The halls looked different. Nothing dramatic, just a mirror that wasn't there yesterday. A small table I didn't remember passing. The hallway felt longer. I paused near the study door, listening. That's when I heard the first whisper. It wasn't clear. More like hissing syllables pressed between the seams of the walls. I leaned closer, pressed my ear against the old wood paneling. And I swear beneath the grain I heard someone say my name. Dylan. It wasn't a ghostly wail. Not a movie cliché. It was subtle. Quiet. Like a child trying to get your attention in church without being caught. I stepped back. Then, instinctively, knocked once on the panel. Tap. A pause. Then from behind the wall. Tap. Identical. Same weight. Same rhythm. I knocked twice. Tap. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. The house was answering. I stood there a long time, breathing slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then I whispered, barely audible. Who's there? No reply. Just the faintest sound of breathing, not mine, close, fast, and wet, like someone exhaling against the other side of the wall. That's when I noticed something strange about the paneling itself. A section of it, maybe a foot wide, was slightly bowed outward. Barely perceptible. Like something behind it had leaned forward, gently pressing its face against the wall from the inside. I reached out, hesitated, and then pressed my palm against the bulge. It was warm. Back in the study, I finally found Ellis. He looked worse than the day before, eyes sunken, skin pale, like he'd slept underwater. He was staring at a painting over the fireplace. A portrait of his great-grandmother, he said. She'd supposedly drowned in the bath, but the body had been bone dry when they found her. I told him about the voices in the wall. He nodded, as if I'd said something as mundane as the plumbing's acting up. It starts like that, he murmured. The house testing your curiosity. Feeding you things you'll lean toward. When it knows what you're afraid of, then it gets personal. I asked him what had happened to the others who lived here. The staff. The previous heirs. His uncle. He didn't answer. Just walked over to a bookshelf, pulled out a dusty journal, and handed it to me. On the first page, in ink so old it had bled through, someone had written. They are not ghosts. They are the rooms. Later that day, I returned to the hallway where I'd heard the knock. I brought my recorder, pressed it against the wall, and let it run while I sat on the floor with a notebook. I tried to ignore the sensation that the wallpaper was, breathing slightly. Expanding, contracting, like lungs too close to the skin. I listened. Nothing. Then, a faint sound. Scratching. Very faint. Then. Let me down. Same voice from the night before. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was directed at me. I stood up. And from the recorder speaker, I heard the last thing I expected. My own voice. Clear. Calm. Saying. I'm coming. But I never said that. Not out loud. Not even in my head. I looked at the recorder. Still running. Still blinking. The hallway behind me had gone dark. That night, I tried to sleep with my coat over the mirror, a rosary tucked under my pillow, and the recorder off. I didn't want to know what I'd hear. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel it. The walls were listening. And now, they had something to say. Chapter 6, The Mirror That Wasn't Covered. Mirrors don't just reflect light. In places like Wintermere, they reflect intention. And sometimes what's staring back doesn't want to give you your place back. I wasn't planning to go near the west wing. Ellis had made it very clear, don't go there. Said that's where it started. That the air there was thicker, the shadows longer, the silence heavier. He said the house kept its worst memories in the west wing. He said it like someone describing a bad organ infected but still alive. But that morning, the door to the wing was open. Not wide. Just a crack. Enough to feel like an invitation. Or a dare. And I accepted it. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped by at least 10 degrees. The candle in my hand shivered in its flame. The corridor was long and narrow, with warped floorboards and wallpaper that had bubbled from years of moisture and secrets. The paintings here were different. Where the East Wing had oil portraits of stiff aristocrats, this hallway had photographs sepia-toned, cracked at the edges, framed under dusty glass. Families. Children. A nursemaid holding a child who had no face. Every photo was slightly off. One had too many fingers. One had no eyes. One showed the same person in the background of 3 different family portraits taken decades apart, never older. Never smiling. Always watching. At the end of the corridor was a full-length mirror. Uncovered. It stood in an antique brass frame, leaned slightly against the wall, as if someone had recently moved it but hadn't bothered to straighten it. Dust blanketed everything else in the hallway. But not the mirror. Its surface was clean. Too clean. I stopped several feet away. Instinct told me, don't go near it. But the silence around me was different here. It felt taut. Tense. Expectant. I took one slow step forward. Then another. When I stood directly in front of it, I felt my chest tighten. Because, it wasn't me. At first glance, sure, same height. Same build. Same clothes. But then I noticed the differences. The man in the mirror didn't move with me. He didn't blink when I blinked. His expression was too still. And then he smiled. Not wide. Just the faint curl of one corner of his mouth. Enough to show teeth. I didn't smile. I didn't move. But he did. He leaned slightly forward, as if peering through a window. As if trying to get a better look at me. I whispered, "What are you?" The figure cocked its head. And that's when I saw it, the eyes. They were wrong. My eyes are hazel. His were black, not pitch black, but deep and bottomless, like staring into something buried far beneath water, where light doesn't reach. He raised his hand. Pressed his palm against the inside of the mirror. And then a second hand rose up beside his. Not mine. Not his. Something smaller. Paler. Like a child's. 2 hands. Pressed against the inside of the glass. I took a step back. The figure didn't. The second hand began tapping slow, rhythmic. Like a code. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. Same rhythm Ellis had been doing unconsciously at the kitchen table. I turned to run. But something stopped me. A sound. Faint. Behind the mirror. Breathing. Labored. Wet. Close. And then a voice muffled, as though trapped behind glass. "You're wearing me?" I backed away fast, candle flickering wildly. The mirror image still didn't move. Just smiled. And as I turned to flee the hallway, I saw, just for a second, in the edge of the frame my reflection turn and walk the other way. Not in sync. Not a glitch. A choice. It left me there. I slammed the door shut behind me and shoved a rusted armchair in front of it. Ellis found me in the entry hall, staring at the blank fireplace. I told him about the mirror. He didn't ask which one. "I thought I'd covered them all," he said. "That one must have moved itself." Moved itself. I didn't even ask what that meant. Instead, I told him what the voice in the mirror had said. "You're wearing me?" He froze. Then looked me dead in the eye. That's not a message, Dylan. It's a warning. The house doesn't want to trap you. It wants to become you. That night, I nailed my coat over the mirror in my room. Not just drape nailed. I slept with the lights on. Not that they did much. And at some point, in that uncertain space between sleep and waking, I heard soft tapping behind the walls again. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Then a breath on the side of my face. But when I turned, nothing was there. Just my reflection in the window. Smiling. Chapter 7, The Nursery. Some rooms don't die. They decay. But they keep their shape. They remember the laughter, the screams, and who didn't get to leave. I found the nursery by accident. It wasn't on any blueprint. Not marked on the hand-drawn floor plan Ellis had sketched for me on the first day. In fact, when I first passed the hallway that led to it, I didn't remember it being there at all. But this morning, there it was, a narrow corridor lined with faded wallpaper, soft blue once, now yellowed and curled at the edges like old scabs. The air smelled faintly sweet sugar, dust, and something else. Something chemical. Like old perfume and formaldehyde. I should have turned back. But I didn't. At the end of the corridor, a door stood half open. It was smaller than the others. Child-sized. The handle was low, tarnished brass with a porcelain knob painted with tiny hand-painted daisies. One was chipped, revealing a sharp edge underneath. I pushed the door open. The scent hit me harder here. Sweetness gone rancid. Candy turned to rot. This was the nursery. And it was long dead. The room was coated in layers of dust so thick it muffled every step. A cradle stood in the far corner, rocking gently though I touched nothing. Its rhythm was off. Too slow. As if rocking to a memory, not a child. A rusted mobile hung above it, its shapes indistinguishable warped animals with flaking paint and eyes that had been scratched out. There were toys scattered across the floor, cloth dolls with black button eyes and brittle limbs. A rocking horse with a split down its spine. A tea set on a table with tiny cracked cups, and one still filled with a dark, crusted liquid. And then the music box started. Soft. Hollow. The same melody I'd heard once before, the one my sister used to hum when we were kids. But this wasn't my sister's tune. Not exactly. It was slower. Off-key. I turned toward the sound. There it was on a dresser near the boarded window. The lid was open, spinning on its own. Inside was a tiny porcelain ballerina, her face mostly rubbed off, spinning in jerks, as if glitching. The music stopped abruptly. Then I heard it. A laugh. Not cheerful. Not playful. Just a single, clipped giggle. Directly behind me. I spun. No one there. But on the wall near the door, half hidden by torn wallpaper, I saw scratch marks. Not random. Words. Names. Or rather one name, over and over again, gouged into the wood beneath the paper. Clara. Clara. Clara, 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 Clara. Some small. Some large. Some carved cleanly, others wild and jagged, like done in haste or rage. Hundreds of repetitions, some overlapping, as if written over again and again by someone whose hands were bleeding. There were tiny blood stains on some of the letters. I pulled the wallpaper back further. More names. All the same. Sometimes written backwards. Sometimes in spirals. In one corner of the room, they formed a sentence. Clara is still playing. I took out my recorder and hit play. I asked aloud, who is Clara? There was silence. Then the rocking horse moved. Not a shift. Not a creak. It rocked, once, with deliberate force. And then came a sound from the cradle. Not a cry. Not words. Just a rattling breath. I stepped slowly toward the cradle, every nerve in my spine screaming. I grabbed the edge and peered over. It was empty. But the mattress was wet as if something had just been there. The indent in the center still fresh. And as I leaned closer, the name Clara whispered right into my left ear. Not from behind me. Not from the room. From the cradle. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. Just as I reached the door, I heard tiny footsteps tip-tap move from behind the rocking horse to the dresser. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just the ballerina in the music box, spinning again. Slowly. And this time, as it spun, her head turned to face me. Later that day, I asked Ellis if there had ever been a child named Clara in the Wintermere family. He didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands and said, quietly, Clara was the one who wasn't supposed to be born. Then he added something else, almost as an afterthought. She died in the attic. But we don't have an attic. That night, I locked my door. Pushed the dresser against it. Taped over the keyhole. Nailed shut the mirror again. And I left a handful of marbles on the floor near the baseboard. Because I swear when I lay down, I heard something small crawl beneath the floorboards. And giggle. Chapter 8, Ellis's Confession. Every haunted house has its secrets. But this one had an heirloom of horror passed down, room by room, until someone finally stayed long enough to listen. I found Ellis in the conservatory the next morning. What used to be a greenhouse was now a graveyard of withered ivy and broken glass. Pale, dust-starved vines curled like fingers around iron support beams. Light came in fractured, through green-tinged glass, giving everything the hue of an old bruise. Ellis sat on a bench with his coat off, sleeves rolled, cigarette trembling between two long fingers. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I saw her, I said. He didn't look at me. Just let the silence settle. In the nursery. Clara. His mouth twitched at the name. Then he exhaled smoke through his nose and said, very softly, you went where the house wanted you to go. I sat across from him on a cracked tile planter. Waited. Let the silence build. Eventually, he started talking. Not in a rushed panic. Not theatrically. Just, tired. Like someone finally unshouldering a weight that had been pressing into their spine for decades. My Uncle Everett lived here most of his life. Alone, after his wife vanished. Said she went out one night to visit her sister in Blythe and never returned. They searched the roads, the rivers, found her handbag by the well. He paused. But the well had been sealed for a century. I didn't interrupt. After that, Everett locked himself in. Said the house spoke to him. That it was changing. He painted over mirrors. Burned half the books in the library. One day, he even tore up every rug in the hallways and scattered iron nails beneath them. Ellis looked at me with dark eyes. To slow it down, he said. What happened to him? I asked. He smiled, hollow. One morning, the maid found him sitting at the dining room table staring at an empty plate. Just, staring. Said he'd been there since the night before. When she asked if he was okay, he said, I'm not sure who's breathing anymore. Then he reached up and tore off his own eyelids. I flinched. Didn't scream, Ellis added. Didn't even bleed much. Just sat back down. A week later, he vanished. Vanished. Ellis nodded. We searched the entire estate. Every room. Every crawl space. Locked doors, sealed windows. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not even a smell. He was gone. And the house. He trailed off, tapping ash into a cracked teacup. It got quieter. Like it had fed. I asked the question hanging between us. Are there records of others? Other heirs? Ellis's face turned to stone. There's a book, he said. In the library. My great-grandfather kept it. It's not public. Not even legal. A list of everyone who lived in this house. He hesitated. I've seen the names. Crossed out. Dated. Each one ending the same way, removed. No explanation. No cause. Just, gone. I thought about the portraits on the walls. The way some faces looked blurred. Or duplicated. Or simply, off. How far back does it go? I asked. Ellis looked up at the ceiling. All the way to the first Wintermere. 1841. The same year the east wing was built over the old asylum foundation. That wasn't in any record I'd seen. I asked him to repeat it. They don't mention it in the deeds, he said. But the house was built on top of something broken. A hospital that treated the unwell. They bricked over the underground halls. Left everything beneath intact. Do you understand what that means? I did. It meant the foundation wasn't just cursed, it was soaked in unresolved pain. It meant the house didn't start haunted. It was grown that way. Ellis stood and walked to the edge of the conservatory, looking out through the moss-smeared glass toward the woods. This house doesn't want guests, Dylan. It wants patterns. Familiar souls. Inheritance isn't just blood here, it's memory. It remembers who belongs. He turned to me. And once it knows you don't, it tries to make you fit. I left him there and returned to my room. The candles had burned out. My coat was still nailed over the mirror. But there was something new on the floor. A drawing. Childlike, done in charcoal or ash. A stick figure. Long arms. Hollow eyes. And written beneath it, in a shaky hand. Clara likes you? That night, I sat with the journal Ellis had given me, flipping through pages. Ink faded. Pages warped by moisture. But on one page, I found a note that stopped my breath. I thought it was the house that was sick. But what if it's not the house? What if it's the family? And the house is just the body they built to hold it. I didn't sleep. Just listened. And around 3 a.m., something pressed its fingers against the inside of the wall. Not scratching. Not knocking. Just a soft, steady stroke like someone petting the wall from the other side.
The story may end here, but the darkness never sleeps. Like this video to keep the shadows stirring. Share your whispers in the comments. Your voice shapes the next nightmare. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Gothic Hour Stories and Mysteries, where every tale lingers and every soul leaves a mark. The Gothic Hour awaits.